that first Sunday of coming to church, everything was under the microscope. Like what everything smelled, what people were wearing, were they talking about me? Were they looking at my boys? Where do I sit? I don't even know the rules of your church. All I knew is what I saw on TV. Do we stand up? Do we sit down? I was clueless.
Well, hey there, I'm Bart Blair, the co-host of the Missional Marketing Podcast, and this is Season 3, Episode 39 of our show. We produce this podcast to help your church grow by leveraging digital marketing and effective communications. And if you're new to the show, we want to welcome you. I want to tell you that I think if you're tuning in for the very first time, you have picked a great episode to start with. Now, make sure that you go back into our archives and listen to some of our older episodes, but this is kind of a stake in the ground, awesome episode that I'm really excited to share with you today. Our guest today is Ann Sibley. Mary Ann and I first met about 9 or 10 months ago or so, attending the Church Communications Conference in Nashville. It was a great opportunity for church communications directors and people who serve in communications in their church from all around the country to gather together in Nashville. I was there kind of facilitating some group discussions, and Mary Ann was there just to be a fly on the wall and learn some things about church comms and church comms people. But Mary Ann is an expert in the area of volunteers and building volunteer teams and leading volunteer leaders. She served on staff of a church that grew from just a couple of hundred people to over 14,000 people with multiple campuses. She has extensive leadership experience in the church. And she serves the church today, the church global, the capital C church, by helping churches build better, stronger, healthier volunteer teams in their church. Now, before we go on to the episode, I do want to mention that there is another church communications conference coming up this fall. It's going to be on September 21st and September 22nd in the Nashville area. And if you're a church communications person, we would love for you to be there at the conference. I'm going to include the link to the conference for registration in the show notes. There is an early bird rate. So if you're listening to this podcast at the time that it is released, make sure that you check in quick so that you can get the best possible rate on attending that conference. You don't want to miss it. Well, again, we appreciate you tuning into the podcast. If you're not subscribed wherever you're listening, make sure you do that. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, subscribe, ring the bell, and scroll down to the comments and answer the question that we post there. Every week, we post a discussion question at the top of the thread on our YouTube channel with each episode, and we'd love to engage with you there to get your feedback and to hear what you're learning, because, well, when we hear what you're learning, that helps us learn too. Anyway, thanks again for tuning in to this episode. Here is Jason Hamrock, the CEO of Missional Marketing, and our interview with Mary Ann Sibley.
Well, hey, Mary Ann, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. I'm doing great. I'm a little if I have a little minor cough, have a little cold, but I'm good.
All right.
On the upswing.
Well, I am pumped about our conversation today. I'm super excited. I love all of our shows that we do, but this one always is just intriguing to me because I want our audience to hear your story. And then we're going to get into some cool things that you've been focusing on inside the church. But let's let our listeners know a little bit about you and your story and tell us.
Tell you. Well, first I have a little disclaimer, I guess. And that's when I was invited, I was thrilled, but I get communications and it's kind of on the technical side when you talk about behind the scenes. That's not this girl. And I thought, oh gosh, I don't think I have anything to offer. But, I was at the conference last year with the communications with Katie and such. And I went there just to be a fly on the wall and just to kind of get a pulse and hear what folks are doing. And what I discovered was that, oh gosh, guess what? Every voice does matter, including mine. Yeah. And so just being able to sit there and give a little perspective and some encouragement to those working so much behind the scenes. So thank you again for inviting me and having me on today. So my story, I was raised in North Carolina. I am a Southern girl. My mom's Japanese. My dad's from Kentucky. So I've got this mixed blend thing happening of being in the South and with a little bit of Japanese of words. I cannot pronounce all the English words, but I was raised Buddhist. I did not go to church growing up. In fact, I have so many stories that really are heartbreaking of how people that I saw go to church either ignored, diminished anything with our family, or just some real hurtful things. And so I grew up seeing church and church people as something I wanted no part of. No part of. My dad was a Marine, and so he had to go overseas several times, which left my mom and my sister and I like a single mom. And there was one summer, I was in the 4th grade. So my sister then was like in the 2nd grade. So here you have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old. We lived on an acre-ish lot, and we had a push mower. And it was no landscaping. It was just a lot. And so the way we would cut the grass is we would start at the very back of the lot, and my mom could push the lawnmower, this cute little Japanese woman. She'd push that mower at least twice. She could go 1, 2, and then she'd start the 3rd, and she'd get tired. And my sister and I had those little old folding chairs that frayed and pinched you. And we would sit there, and I would get up and I would finish it. And I would then kind of get back, and then I would sit down, and my sister would get up and she would do a little bit, and then we'd move the chairs back, and my mom would get up, and that was our rotation like this. And we'd move the chairs back and move the chairs back. And the reward was always Dairy Queen ice cream. So we did it as a team. But one of our neighbors had a riding lawnmower. And I remember looking at that riding lawnmower and thinking, how fun would that be? And I wish we had a riding lawnmower. And so when my dad got back from serving in Vietnam, never invited us to church. But when my dad got back, they invited us. So the timing, I have no idea. But I remember a Saturday morning, my mom came to my dad and said, so-and-so, and she, in her voice, invite us to church. And my dad's like, did they ever come over and help my girls cut the grass while I was gone? Because he knew they had a riding lawnmower. And she said, no. And he said, they can keep their church. And as an impressionable 9-year-old, 4th grader, that was like, that's right. I mean, I own that. If my dad said it, it was happening. And so that was so many of the beginnings of, if you said church to me or anything on that, I saw on TV, it was to me something I either avoided or I saw as really negative. So when I found myself a single mom, I was in my 40s, I had 2 boys. They were roughly middle school, elementary school age. Suffering depression, had 1 suicide attempt. So obviously things were happening. But on the outside, I looked great. Like I was vice president of a commercial lending bank, national bank. So I was traveling. I was lending millions of dollars. So on the outside, man, I had it together. But clearly I didn't. And in 40 years, no one, except for that one family that we rejected, but especially myself as a single mom, nobody invited me to church personally. Not in high school. I'm in the South. Not in college. Nothing. And so now I'm in my 40s and I'm this crazy single mom. And one of the neighbors started just loving on us. Just loving on us, being kind to us, including my boys, including me. And it took 2 years of my saying no before we finally went. She would say, hey, you should come check out church. I was like, no. Like, she's coming over. I'm closing the door. And, God, this is what I love. I love. God was softening my heart. He was providing the steps. And she, my friend, her name is Becky. I always said I didn't know God, but I knew Becky. And between Becky and her family, that first time coming to church, because they loved my boys. And, as a single mom, if you love my kids well, you're going to get my attention. And so after 2 years of this, and I'm watching, I'm like, and now the boys are like, we need to go to church. And I'm thinking, who are you? Because Becky had boys and they played together and they did fun things and their church would invite them. And I would look at these outings. They take my boys, and never once did I think, oh, what nice church people. I would think free Saturday. Like, this was just rescue. And they never preached at me, nothing. And I kept waiting for it, but they would invite me. So that first Sunday I decided to go. I was nervous. I honestly thought I was going to throw up because, walk me into a boardroom, get me on a plane in New York or California, and I'm great.
You're good.
Church? Because I had pre-decided, okay, I know I'm not going to like you, and I'm pretty sure you're not going to like me. And you're going to see this single mom walk in and you're going to start judging and questioning me. And I don't need that in my life, frankly. So I decided to go only because the boys begged and I just needed to get Becky off my back. I just need to go one time and be kind and go, thanks, I went. Don't ask me again. And as we're driving into this little tiny church, and at that time, the church was maybe 100, 140 people.
Okay.
I was intimidated like crazy. We pull in this tiny, tiny parking lot. And I say to myself, give me one reason to leave. Just one reason. Just look at me funny or don't look at me. Like roll that eye, like anything. I am looking for a reason. I was that girl. And so we pull in this parking lot and I'm thinking, oh, no place to park. I guess we have to leave. And there was this one guy with a vest on in the parking lot as a volunteer. And he sees me and he smiles and he waves at me. And I was like, great. And he's like, come this way. And I follow him and he points to the one parking spot that's left. And he says, right here. And I parked and I'm like, now I have to get out. And, I think about someday I'll have this conversation with God. He's like, okay, we got her there. Now she just got to get out. Like, it's just the baby steps. And that first Sunday of coming to church, everything was under the microscope. Like what everything smelled, what people were wearing, were they talking about me? Were they looking at my boys? Where do I sit? I don't even know the rules of your church. All I knew is what I saw on TV. Do we stand up? Do we sit down? I was clueless. The words they were singing, I didn't understand. And I'm looking at some of the words of one of the jokes was the very first Christian song I ever heard was Ancient of Days. Do y'all know that song?
I do, yeah.
We're laughing because I'm thinking that's bad English. Like, I'm sitting there and they're singing Ancient of Days. And I'm going, this is a cult. I don't know. But, it didn't offend me and I didn't run screaming out the door. And I came back and it was only about a month later where I met Jesus. And then my boys met Jesus and everything changed. So I have a huge red hot memory. Like it is right here that day. And for whatever reason, I know that God's never going to let me forget that because I know that not only are there people like me who are like, okay, I know I look good, but I'll go to church and figure it out. Yeah. But there are people who know church and they're looking to go back, or sometimes maybe it's just complacency and they're showing up at your church and they're just like, checking the box.
Yeah. And
we have a great opportunity to flip that upside down, right? We just can't waste a Sunday.
What was the moment that made you think, I like these people and I'm going to come back? What was it?
So in the beginning, I came back not the very next week, but only the weeks to take my boys.
Okay.
because my boys were really tied into the kids at the church. And so I was being a good mom, bringing them to the church. And I also wanted to make sure it wasn't a cult because my kids were so involved. I'm like, I'm just going to come with them and hear and read and listen and see, because if it is, I need to pull them out. They can't be friends anymore.
Yeah.
So that was really, that was the real initiative. Like Becky got me into the church, right? This is a family that loved on this family, period. Invited me to cookouts, let her husband come over and fix something that was broken in my home, and helped to soften the heart so that I finally felt like, okay, I'll go because I like you guys and you've been kind to me and you've not shown me anything but love and acceptance. So I'm willing to give it a shot. And then, but once I'm in there, now I'm exposed to the environment, the other people, what I'm hearing, seeing, right? So,
So Marianne, you were going every other week because you had shared custody with your ex-husband. So your sons were only with you. But at one point, I know your story. At one point, you decided to go one Sunday without your sons.
I know. That's crazy talk.
Yeah.
So this is, y'all, this is the thing. When I talk to ministry people, and especially the work that I do, we want a lot of logistics. And I think with tech and communications, it's a lot of buttons, it's tech, it's all this, which it is, and it's important and we need it. But somehow in the midst of all that, we have forgotten the awe and wonder of God and what he can actually do.
Yeah.
We just forget. And so going that day, I woke up, and months later, people in the church said, we've been praying for you and we'd see you come in. Like all this was happening behind the scenes. I had no idea. But I woke up one Sunday, or going to bed Saturday night without my boys. And I had a crazy idea of maybe I should go to church, like just me. I don't know. That might be a good idea. And I kind of played with it. And I said, well, we'll see. I'll get up in the morning. So I'm an early riser. I overslept Sunday morning. I never oversleep. A single mom over here. You got to get up before the crack of dawn and get those kids going. And so I thought, well, that's fine. I miss church. I'm not going to go. Like, I'm not going to, beat myself up to go. But then, and I know now this was the Holy Spirit. It's like, go anyways. You just go. And I'm like, well, I might be late. And, I'm a stickler for lateness. So that's a whole nother issue. And my dad in the military is like, you're early. And if you're on time, you're late. But for whatever reason, I got dressed and I went to church. And when I walked in the door, I could hear the music and I knew, oh, great, it's late. I didn't have my boys as my little barrier, my little comfort. It was just me.
Yeah.
And now remember, this is a small church. And I walked in and everyone was standing. And I peered in the door and I thought, I'm not walking in there and look for a seat. That's scary and vulnerable and awkward. And so I turned to leave. And there was one man and he followed me to the door and he said, can I help you? And I was like, oh, I see that you're full. and he goes, I can find you a seat. Would you mind waiting here? And I'll go find you a seat. And I said, sometimes you just can't say no to things, right? Yep. I'm like, okay. I guess I was thinking he won't find a seat. So he doesn't drag me in there. He goes in. He finds, because I know this man, I learned to love him later. He found the perfect seat for me. Who knows what he did to find that seat? He probably made someone get up and move. He comes back and he goes, I found you a seat. Follow me. So now I'm following this man to a seat. I'm not having to look, be awkward, be embarrassed that I'm late. Here's this man walking me, sits me. Here you go. Here's your seat. I was like, thank you so much. And I just kind of nestled in. And that was the Sunday after the sermon. I don't remember what the sermon was, but I remember at the end, I am a sobbing mess. Like I was broken. And Becky's husband, Jeff, was on the worship team. And he looks out at the end of service, and I look at him, and he sees my face, and I'm a mess. And I know now what he's thinking. And I'm going, where's Becky? And he's on the worship team. He's giving directions from the stage down the hall. Go. And so I think about that first Sunday when I was a mess. And then I told Becky, I said, I think I need to have an appointment with your pastor. And she's like, why? I said, because I don't know why. I just think I have to have a sit down. I don't know why. She doesn't say a word. Now, I told our pastor this. He goes, that's a strong Holy Spirit, because Becky does never not say anything. She didn't talk about, do you want to talk about Jesus? She said nothing. She said nothing. She said, okay, that's a great idea. Gave me the number. So I walked into my pastor's office that Tuesday after that Sunday. And I decided the reason I was going in there to talk to him was to confess that I was a Buddhist and I probably wasn't allowed to be there. Oh. I'm a college graduate. I lend millions of dollars to corporations. But in the world of church, I was a baby. I knew nothing. And I remember it's like, I'm probably not allowed to be here. And if you knew that I was a Buddhist, you'd be like, oh, you have to leave.
Like on the other team. Yeah.
Yeah. Why are you here, Mary Ann? And we sat and had a good long talk, about an hour. And I left accepting Jesus as my Lord and Savior.
Amen.
That was the Tuesday after the Sunday.
Wow. What a story.
It is. Yeah. What a God.
Wow. Okay. So I love hearing your story. And as we're going to talk a little bit about the giftedness that God has given you. I want to get into that in a minute. But this is such an important message for anybody who's listening to this. And that is, I think we make the mistake of just doing church for church people. Mm-hmm. And we have to realize you never know who's sitting in your worship center or your room. That's your story. Yeah. And it's so important. Not that we have to have our A game every single time, but we just have to be authentic. I think real. Yes. Recognize.
Yes. And I would also add, because this is what happened when I started leading the ministry, when I started working on staff at a church, who'd have thunk, is that I would start leading volunteers, and I'm sitting there and I would tell my husband, I got remarried. I would tell my husband, I'm not supposed to do this. These people grew up in church. I didn't. I just got my first Bible. I said, I'm not qualified. I can't do this. And of course, he just smiled and keep going. But what I learned is we would talk about God, and I was constantly going, this is why we're doing it. Remember, not only for the Mary Anns, but what I started learning was there were people who'd been to church the whole lives, and they were coming to me going, I had forgotten. And so when our radar and our sensitivity and our focus is clearly grounded in the big why, and we are reminded with, why we're going to put that graphic. Does it point to the why? Is that going to speak to someone? Then God, again, the God factor, will use those things. Even a crazy song like Ancient of Days to someone like me, he will take it and say, because it is done to my glory and it is done to honor me, and because you love me, she will not be offended. And she will be curious, and she may say, but it's okay. He goes, I don't care. God's like, just have her come back. You know what I mean? You just keep loving her. And I think that is one of the biggest things that I see we take for granted, that when we're in church or on staff, that's like, we got that. It's God. We know he is. Okay, let's talk about all the other things.
Yeah. So your ministry, your passion's really around volunteers, right?
Yeah.
So talk to me about Because churches, it seems like that's always a difficult thing for churches to recognize, how to recruit volunteers, how to keep volunteers. What advice do you have for them?
I'm laughing because it is the most critical thing. And I hear church leaders complain even about, like, we can't get them. And yet that is one of the least areas that is resourced and focused on. It's like, we'll get a warm body for now. Let's get us through this Sunday. Yeah. Right? Sally's always here. Bring Sally back in. And meanwhile, we're killing Sally or Joe. And so, but yet I think of these, the volunteers are the people that represent the greatest treasure, the greatest thing that God wants us to steward. And that's one another. Love God, love others, period. That's it. It's like, these are the others. And we get caught up in, and listen, this church that I met Jesus in, that was a little bit over 100 people, grew to over 14,000 when I left there in 2014.
Wow.
So we grew into this massive multi-campus church. And I understand how Sundays come every week. And I understand it takes bodies and hands and feet to make things like that work. Yeah. But I also saw firsthand the difference between in really caring for the people, caring and seeing that the volunteers are not there just to further your mission. The volunteers are the mission.
Yeah.
And when we can really get that in our heads, changes everything. And then because again, this is what God did. Because I didn't grow up in church and I didn't know the rules. I did all the other things that people said you couldn't do. But I didn't know any different. And I had a really great pastor who's like, go for it, Mary Ann. And I tried things. And what I learned was we have to look at who is directly in front of us, lean into them, give them a voice, and really go, what works for us, for our DNA, for our church, for what God is calling us to do. And don't be afraid to try things.
Interesting. Yeah. When you're saying that, I still have a question for you, but something just comes to my mind. And that is, I think often, we look at ourselves and say, oh, God gave me this gift. I'm really good at this gift. And if you're a staff person and you're listening to this, I think sometimes we forget that our volunteers aren't people, necessarily just people. They're people that God gave them a gift. And so they're trying to steward that well. If you don't allow them to steward that well, you're cutting off not only just a person, but you're cutting off God from working through that person into other lives.
Yeah.
That's kind of heavy when you think about it.
That's it. Where's my ding bell? It's over here. I actually used a ding bell in my ministry, especially with my leaders. And when we would have these moments, people would jump up and ding, 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 ding. Because we have to really hit it home. And I believe we should have fun in church too, by the way. So, but I think we are hogging all the good stuff. Like, look, I think one of the biggest things, I talked to a pastor recently, and he was asking about, time management and all. What it really boiled down to was he wasn't willing to let go of anything.
Yeah.
And it either has to be, particularly in production, perfect or my way. And I'm that girl too. And I learned the hard way through getting shingles and pink eye at the same time. At a very younger age. And I remember thinking, I thought only old people got shingles. But it was bad. And our volunteer team had grown to 200. And it was ugly. And I was thinking, I still had to do everything.
Yeah.
And I remember, some of us, well, Mary Ann, what's God trying to tell you? And just as Jethro told Moses, this thing you're doing is not good. It's going to wear you out. Well, check for Mary Ann, shingles, pink eye, and then it will wear them out. And I'm like, people were like, oh, she's too busy for us. Oh, she's this. And it was not pretty. And that was a wake-up call for me that something had to change. And when I started building a real intentional leadership path, what it really boiled down to is for me taking someone and saying, okay, I would love for you to lead these 10 people. But okay, so it's not about posting and scheduling. Like, do you know them?
Yeah.
Like, will you really love them early on Sunday? Like I'm not kidding. If we have someone, a volunteer, raise their hand and say, I'll show up at dark 30 on a Sunday, or I'll show up, and we don't treasure that opportunity to minister to them, to disciple them. Look, y'all, it's really a discipleship opportunity.
Yeah.
Hi, Bart Blair here. I'm the producer of Missional Marketing's Church Growth Interviews podcast. On behalf of our entire team, we really appreciate you tuning in. Let me ask you a question. If you're a church leader or a church communications professional, do you know how Google sees your church website? In other words, if people in your community were to Google churches near me, or best church in my city, or good church nearby, do you know where your church website would show up in those search results? At the top maybe, or somewhere in the middle, or somewhere on page 4? There's a common misunderstanding that if we simply build a great website and we launch it, that Google will somehow work its magic and people will find us online. But there's a bit more art and science to making sure that your church website shows up in the top of those search results. And that science is called local SEO, or local search engine optimization. And at Missional Marketing, local SEO is one of the core services that we provide for churches all across the United States and Canada. And we'd love to help you. If you'd like to learn more, click to our website at missionalmarketing.com and follow the link at the top of the page that says Church SEO. You can request a free local SEO report to see how your church is showing up in Google these days, and you can schedule an appointment to talk with Jason or with me or with one of our other digital strategists to help you decide whether or not a local SEO boost is right for your church. Hey, again, we appreciate you tuning into our podcast, and we look forward to the opportunity to serving you in your church and reaching more people for Jesus. Now, back to the show. You say that. My first full-time ministry role was as a worship pastor and a creative arts director in a church. And I transitioned from a corporate job where I was in middle management in a very large company, and I'd had a staff of people who showed up and worked 45 to 50 hours a week for a good paycheck and earned bonuses, and they sat in their cubicles and stared at their computers and sat on their phones and did the things that I expected them to do because it was their job. And then I transitioned out of the corporate world into my first ministry job. And I, as a volunteer in my church, the church hired me because I was a high capacity volunteer. I was doing a lot, I was serving a lot, and they just decided they wanted all of my time instead of just some of my time. But I had this natural assumption that everyone was going to serve at the same level that I had always served, and that they were going to work the same way all my paid staff in my previous job had. And all I had to do was just put them on the schedule, and they were going to show up and do what I asked them to do. And I oversaw the worship team and the creative arts ministry. I oversaw all of our first impressions in hospitality. And I learned in my first probably year to year and a half, my first 18 months, that I was a terrible leader because people were resenting me because I was putting too much emphasis on the production and not enough emphasis on the people. And I needed to put people before the production. And in what you just shared just now, I just flashed back 20 odd years and a moment of conviction where I realized I just wasn't, we were a portable church for 9-10 years. You want to talk about people showing up at dark 30 to unload a trailer and to set up band equipment and to haul out of the stuff. And I would like to think that over the last 20 plus years, I've grown in some maturity and some awareness, and I lead better. But those were hard. It was a hard lesson for me to learn. I'm glad that God allowed me to learn it early. And boy, if we can help other leaders learn that same lesson a lot easier than I did, that'd be awesome.
So what are some of the misconceptions that churches or church leaders have on how to, effectively lead or manage volunteers? What are mistakes or misconceptions?
I don't think they think of it they may say the words lead volunteers. I think it's more scheduling and managing and let it go. And then with under the pretense or the idea or the hope and desires, we're leading a team. What I've noticed is that there really aren't very many real teams out there. They're just pools of people. And when we moved and I started serving at a church, they're like, you're going to join a team. And I'm like, okay, I'm in. And I realized this is not a team. This is not a team. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Text in Church and their Engage conference, but I did a talk on it recently that talked about a real team versus a pool of people. And it makes a difference. And again, it's about knowing your people. And so I think the misconception with volunteers is we're typically looking at a spreadsheet or a document, and we're just trying to fill in the spaces. We need someone to hold the baby. We need someone to run the camera. We need 5 people here. And we stop there a lot of times just because, like with you, Bart, you were saying that you were having to do all these jobs. It blows my mind. It's like, that's not fair to you, much less the people that you are supposed to be pouring into and caring for. It's impossible. You just can't do it. It's too many different directions you're going in. So I had to say no to my pastor a lot. My job at the time was over volunteers, anything to do with hospitality, coffee, ushers, parking. We had over 1,000 volunteers. And so I would have to go to the well whenever there was extra events or things because our team, they were awesome. These people, they were crazy. I couldn't keep them out the door. So it was my job to be the voice for them. Like I would give them a voice, and there's a whole thing about debriefs and do your volunteers have a voice? And I had to really know what was going on through their leaders. I can't know 1,000 people, but I can know 12 directors. And the 12 directors have been responsible to talk to all their team leaders. And together they come to me and I'm like, okay, we have some hard decisions to make. And I would say, that's a great idea. But I'm going to say no to that because we've got this and this and this, and I must protect the people. And I was willing to take all the slings and arrows because it was more important that I was stewarding the people who were raising their hands and coming in and giving their all. People, like what you were saying, that had jobs, that were working, caring for parents. Like there's just so many other things happening that I constantly talked about and shared and made everyone be aware of so that no one would forget the person standing next to you is a child of God. Person standing next to you that you're serving may need to be relieved, and you may need to go over there and pray with them, and y'all just go to church and not worry about it. God's bigger than you and I standing here at this church today.
So give me one takeaway for our audience. And some of them are leading a few volunteers to some lead a lot of volunteers. Give me one takeaway on what they should do to help create a culture of not just filling out the sheet to make sure everybody's serving this weekend, but, building a relationship or something like that. What's the takeaway that they should do?
That's too hard.
Where do we start? Give us one.
I mean, everyone wants, give me the magic pill. Give me the magic thing. I do have, maybe it's not the magic, but a simple thing. Let's do that. Okay. When I think back at 200 for me, and I had to figure out, I don't know what I'm doing. Let me even back up. Even before then, we were building a new building, and we had, I knew I was getting involved in some things with the church with volunteers because our building we were building was almost finished. So I did then what I would say I did when we got to 200 is I looked around the church and I said, who are the key volunteers? Who are the ones that show up, have a kind heart? Eventually we came to 2 words. Are they coachable and are they approachable? Will they take feedback? Will they ask for feedback and really want it? So I gathered like 5 people in a room between one of the services. And I just stood in front of them and said, This isn't my ministry. This isn't just my church. This is our church. And we have a situation or a dilemma or a roadblock or whatever it may be, or a season. What do y'all think? And then shut up. Like, get in front of a whiteboard, get a pad, and let them tell you. Now, it may take some time and convincing by you sitting there not saying anything for a while, because they're used to church staff people talking to them. And this is not a complaint session. This is not that. But when you present it in a very mature, loving way, every single time I got met with mature, loving responses. Every time. And these people now have buy-in. You're hearing things. You're hearing the other perspective. And then you're getting the solutions that they want to implement. And we tweak it. And we constantly look at on the battlefield on a Sunday. And we look across the aisles and we're going, we got this, right? Like, this is what we agreed on. Oh, we need a debrief. So I would just say the first thing is to gather your 1 or 2 or 3 people, whatever, and get in a room and get serious and say, and be vulnerable, like y'all in the South. This is hard, or we're dropping the ball, or are we dropping the ball? Like, what do you notice that makes you cringe? What is it that's keeping you inviting your friends and your neighbor and your coworker or your family member? Like, who are we not reaching? Why are we not reaching them? And just whiteboard it and just start that process. Because when people really believe, because you have smart people in your church, that they can have this ownership, that you're going to really allow them and want them and invite them into the conversation, man, you start the foundation. That's what Jesus did. He invited these guys and said, So tell me, how you doing? Even though he knew, right?
Yep. All right. That's amazing advice. And if we could just start there, I think we're going to be in good shape. Yep.
Good.
Well, cool. We probably should wind this down. Because I'm sure there's some people that would be going, how do I get a hold of Mary Ann? I'd love to connect with her, especially you're available. Like, you want to talk with people that have some questions or need some advice. So how can people get a hold of you?
Well, my name is my website, maryansibley.com. You can click there and I have contact information, or you can email me at info@matterspark.com. And I always offer a free consult. Like, I just want to talk to church leaders. Like, I'm happy to brainstorm with you and see, where are some areas that maybe can help first steps to focus.
Generally speaking, Mary Ann, when you're engaging with churches, what are some of the primary things that you're helping them work through?
2 things. Sometimes it's leadership coaching. And I find particularly pastors have a lot of resources for mentors and coaching. But there's that next layer of ministry leader that sometimes doesn't believe they can have it, and it's not access. So that's kind of where I love to be and I land. So I do a lot of leadership coaching, and because I've been on church staff, I understand, and it's a safe place. So we coach some leadership best practices. And in the realm of volunteers, I help them I do on site, like they call it secret worshiping, but I come on site just like I did when I was a 40-year-old Buddhist, walking into your church and just looking at everything and giving some eyes and ears and feedback and sitting. What I love to do is at the end of that Sunday, I sit with their key people. They can invite anyone they want to the debrief meeting with me and the pastors. And we sit and we talk about what I saw, what they think. And then from there, we can decide where the focus needs to be with helping volunteers. What is a real team? How do you build a leader? How do you find a leader? How do you fire a volunteer? Like, what's a healthy rhythm for your volunteers to serve? All that.
Excellent. Super helpful. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're interested in having a 41-year-old former Buddhist come and visit your church, you like that? I'm your best friend, aren't I?
You are.
You can call Mary Ann and she will come and hook you up. Jason, any parting shots from you before we wrap things up today?
No, I love your story, and it just encourages me that I see I hear your story, know that people at my church have the same story. And I have to be mindful and my eyes open about how to engage people that I interact with and make sure I invite them to church and just love on people, because that's what we're called to do.
Yeah.
Not judge, not advise, just love on them and invite them to church.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amen.
If you're a follower of Jesus and you listen to this podcast and you have a riding lawnmower and you have neighbors that don't, be a good neighbor and lend them your rider or go and mow their lawn for them. That's my key takeaway. Hey, Mary Ann, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. Those of you who are listening to this podcast or watching on our YouTube channel, we appreciate you giving your time to us. We know you have lots of choices about the podcast that you listen to, and the fact that you'd let us invade your ear space for a little while means a ton. If you haven't subscribed or left us a review wherever you listen or watch the podcast, make sure that you do that. And until next time, on behalf of Jason and Mary Ann, we're out of here.